The high-stress, high-cost, high-risk nature of filmmaking means that there are always going to be accidents on set, and that there are always going to be those litigious cockroaches scuttling out of the woodwork looking for their piece of the pie. I mean, who can forget the woman who sued the producers of Drive for quote-unquote mismarketing it as a Fast and Furious type action film? Imagine being annoyed at Drive. Often lawsuits are filed off the back of specific scenes though. These can range from the reasonable to the questionable to the flat-out frivolous and ridiculous. From understandable requests for compensation after horrifying accidents to blatantly outlandish attempts to fleece a production for some fast cash. Frat boy racists get outed. Borat. It's not terribly surprising that Sacha Baron Cohen's outrageous satirical mockumentary resulted in a number of lawsuits, with numerous quote-unquote participants alleging that they were misled about the nature of filming. But the legal case that took the cake stemmed from the infamous sequence where Borat hangs out with a trio of boozed-up frat boys who end up making racist remarks. Two of the University of South Carolina students featured sued the producers, citing defamation, that the film had impacted their ability to secure jobs, and that they were fed alcohol while under the belief that the footage would never be shown in the US. The two participants were seeking to be cut out of the DVD's release, though the suit was ultimately dismissed in February 2007.
Misappropriating a goat-headed statue. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Netflix's hugely successful reboot of Sabrina the Teenage Witch came under fire back in 2018 for featuring a goat-headed deity statue in 4 of the first season's 10 episodes. Mere days after the season debuted, religious group The Satanic Temple filed a copyright lawsuit against Netflix and Warner Bros. Entertainment, claiming that the show's statue copied the design of their own sculpture of Baphomet, a winged goat-headed occult figure, without their permission. The Satanic Temple sought at least $50 million in damages from the streamer, and despite the tendency for legal proceedings to drag on forever, the case was quickly settled out of court less than a month after the offending episodes first aired. The Satanic Temple was awarded an undisclosed sum, likely far less than $50 million, and the credits for each of the 4 episodes were edited to give the organization credit for the design.
A motorcycle stunt gone wrong. Resident Evil: The Final Chapter. While filming a scene for the 6th and supposedly final Resident Evil film, in which protagonist Alice rides her motorcycle across the post-apocalyptic zombie wasteland, stuntwoman Olivia Jackson received life-threatening injuries when her bike collided with a camera crane which had been lowered too early. Jackson was left in a medically induced coma for 2 weeks, while the extent of her injuries included a, quote, degloved face, crushed facial bones, a severed neck artery, broken ribs, torn fingers, nerve damage in her spinal cord, and the eventual amputation of her thumb and paralyzed left arm. Jackson inevitably filed a suit against the producers, including director Paul W.S. Anderson, citing that the production, quote, elevated financial considerations over safety, end quote. She further claims that she was asked to do the stunt last minute with minimal prep in poor weather, and was misinformed post-injury by the producers how extensively her medical coverage would support her treatments.
Bruce Willis gets hit in the head. Tears of the Sun. Filming action movies is a complex process, requiring explosions and shootouts to be carefully staged in order to minimize the risk posed to the actors, but occasionally that risk isn't able to be nullified completely, as Bruce Willis discovered on the set of his 2003 war film, Tears of the Sun. While shooting one of the flick's many hectic action scenes in October 2002, Willis was hit in the head by a projectile and suffered, quote, extreme mental, physical, and emotional pain as a result. He subsequently sued the production company Revolution Studios, accusing the filmmakers of failing to ensure his safety. Details of the suit's settlement aren't publicly available, but if Willis had made tens of millions of dollars after pleading his case, chances are we'd have heard about it by now. So a small financial figure, if anything, seems more likely.
Sheldon's Soft Kitty song ripped off another song. The Big Bang Theory. Even the most casual fan of The Big Bang Theory will likely remember the Soft Kitty song that Sheldon's mother would sing for him whenever he was sick. The song ended up serving as a reoccurring gag throughout the series, enough so that it eventually caught the attention of the heirs of the late author Edith Newlin, who claimed that their mother's lyrics for the poem Soft Kitty, which was written for the 1937 children's book Songs for the Nursery School, was used without their permission. Though the book's publishers, Willis Music, held that they retained the rights to Newlin's poem and licensed them to the show, Newlin's children contested that they in fact owned the rights. A lawsuit against CBS was initiated in 2015, and by 2017, a judge ruled against the Newlin family.
Bryan Singer's questionable gas chamber shower. Apt pupil. Bryan Singer's 1998 psychological thriller Apt Pupil features a sequence where 16-year-old high school student Todd Bowden imagines his showering classmates as Jewish prisoners in the gas chamber at a concentration camp. Wait, hang on, what the hell is this film about again? 2 weeks after the scene was filmed in California's Elliott Middle School, a 14-year-old extra filed a lawsuit claiming he was told to strip naked for the scene and refused to do so. Later, 2 other boys aged 16 and 17 made similar claims, one complying with the request and the other not. All 3 boys claimed the experience traumatized them and filed for damages against the filmmakers on the grounds of emotional distress, negligence, and invasion of privacy. Despite considerable press coverage though, no charges were pressed due to the insufficient evidence, and Singer ended up reshooting the scene with adult actors to ensure the film was completed on schedule. In the 2+ decades since the film's release, however, numerous additional unrelated suits have been filed against Singer, citing sexual abuse.
The most expensive map in movie history, Lay the Favourite. Another Bruce Willis-related lawsuit. This recent case doesn't directly involve the actor, but is linked to one of his films, the 2012 gambling drama Lay the Favourite. Map maker Victor Baker filed a lawsuit against Netflix, Amazon, and Random House Films, pointing out that the movie used some of his copyrighted work in the background of a scene without his permission. The specific work is a map of the Caribbean island Curacao, which can be seen on the wall of an office in the background of the film. Within the lawsuit, Baker requested $150,000 in statutory damages, or a license fee for use of the map, and asked that the companies stop distributing the movie with the map scenes still included.
Using the copyrighted phrase, choose your own adventure, Black Mirror, Bandersnatch. If you're ever wondering why Netflix never followed through with their original plan to branch out with more choose your own adventure stories following their Emmy-winning success story of Black Mirror's Bandersnatch, there's a damn good reason for it. Shortly after the interactive feature-length episode was dropped on Netflix in late 2018, ChooseCo, the company that owns the republishing rights to the very idea of choose your own adventure books, filed a lawsuit against the streaming giants. Their primary contention was that by using the phrase choose your own adventure, Netflix had infringed their trademark. ChooseCo sought $25 million in damages as a result, alleging that Netflix did indeed try to license the term in 2016, but negotiations broke down. Netflix's claim that they invoked the term within the confines of fair use was ultimately thrown out, and in late 2020, they finally settled with ChooseCo for an undisclosed sum.
John McClane's Black & Decker, or lack thereof, Die Hard 2 Die Harder. Alright, on to something a bit more lighthearted now. The lawsuit that befell the producers of Die Hard 2 Die Harder is an especially interesting case, because it stems not from a scene in the movie, but one that was filmed yet ultimately cut from the theatrical release. With the sequel's budget skyrocketing to $70 million, 2.5 times the original's modest $28 million, Fox sought relief by deferring to product placement, striking a deal with hardware tycoons Black & Decker to include their new Univolt drill in a scene for $20,000. On an unrelated note, if anyone from Black & Decker is watching this and wants to get in touch, that would be totally fine. Please, I have student loans to pay off. Anyway, pardon that breakdown, the scene in question was to see John McClane use the drill to unscrew a duct at the airport, while Black & Decker mounted a Die Hard-centric promotional campaign, only to learn 3 days before the film's release that the scene had been cut. The company sued for $150,000 in damages, citing a quote loss of credibility, despite never actually paying the production the stated $20,000 in the first place. Still, Fox eventually settled out of court, though curiously, the Univolt never showed up in any of Die Hard 2's released deleted scenes either.
Pandora's Floating Islands, Avatar. While there's an insane amount of money behind the film, $2.7 billion in profits, there will also be people who feel like they're owed a slice of it, and that's precisely what inspired Roger Dean to file a legal complaint against director James Cameron and studio 20th Century Fox. The lawsuit, worth a massive $50 million, was submitted in 2013, with Dean claiming that Cameron's sci-fi epic copied elements of Pandora's look from his own body of work. In particular, the lawsuit specified that the film's floating islands and ancient trees were hugely derivative of Dean's own art, and that things looked so similar that it would have been impossible for Cameron to have copied him accidentally. In the end, though, the suit was dismissed by a New York judge, with the court finding no substantial similarities between Dean's work and Cameron's film.
Depicting Olivia de Havilland as a gossip, Feud. In FX's hit 27 drama series Feud, Catherine Zeta-Jones appears in 6 episodes as legendary actress Olivia de Havilland, and a few months later FX were then hit with a lawsuit by none other than Havilland herself. The actress filed the lawsuit a day before she turned 101 years old, claiming that the series portrayed her as a gossip, taking particular issue with a scene where she refers to her sister Joan Fontaine as a bitch. She further complained that the show's faux documentary style would lead audiences to believe that its account of her was accurate. In 2018, however, the lawsuit was dismissed on the notion that a person cannot own history, before declaring that FX were entitled to have their legal fees reimbursed. Despite Havilland making an appeal to the Supreme Court, they declined to hear her case.
Joey jerks it without permission. Couples Retreat. You'd be forgiven for forgetting that 2009's critically panned rom-com Couples Retreat even exists. Yet a scene in which Jon Favreau's Joey masturbates using a pamphlet featuring former model Irina Krupnik resulted in legal action against the film. Krupnik filed a $10 million misappropriation of likeness invasion of privacy suit, claiming that while she signed a release on the picture a decade prior, for which she was paid $1,500, she never agreed to the quote, quasi-pornographic context in which the image was used. Hilariously, the suit went into needlessly specific detail about the scene, fixating on Favreau's weight in the misplaced interest of context. The judge threw the suit out and she received diddly squat for her efforts.
Netflix accused of defamation, The Laundromat. Netflix's The Laundromat was one of the service's best original movies of 2019, but prior to its wide release, it was caught up in a complicated legal battle started by the two men at the center of its story, Jürgen Mosak and Ramon Fonseca. The duo, co-founders of a law firm that was forced to close after some of its shady dealings were exposed by the Panama Papers, launched a defamation lawsuit against Netflix in October 2019, taking issues with the scenes that portrayed them as, quote, ruthless, uncaring lawyers. In its defense, Netflix described the film's take on the two men as cartoonish, and said that director Steven Soderbergh had made a comedic morality tale before ending with the mic drop line that Mosak and Fonseca's reputations were ruined long before the release of The Laundromat. Ouch. Ultimately, a judge cleared the movie for release as planned, and upon hearing that verdict, Netflix called the lawsuit a frivolous legal stunt designed to censor creative expression.
Hannah Baker's suicide inspiring real suicide attempts. 13 Reasons Why. Teen drama series 13 Reasons Why was immediately controversial upon its release due to its matter-of-fact depiction of suicide, namely that of the focal figure Hannah Baker, which many critics and mental health advocates believed could trigger vulnerable youngsters to attempt to follow the actions they saw. Netflix responded by adding advisory warnings to the series' more sensitive episodes, and in July 2019, over 2 years after the show debuted, they edited Hannah's suicide scene to be less graphic. But the matter didn't end there. John Herndon, whose 16-year-old daughter committed suicide after allegedly watching the show, recently filed a class action lawsuit, claiming that Netflix willingly released the show despite having full knowledge of the risks it posed to vulnerable youngsters, who could be targeted by the streaming service's selective content algorithm. The suit also blames Netflix for hundreds of suicides which could have occurred since the show's release.
Microwave defamation drama, American Hustle. Movie lawsuits don't get much weirder or more unexpected than this. In addition to receiving 10 Oscar nominations, David O. Russell's American Hustle was slapped with a lawsuit due to a scene in which Rosalind Rosenfeld tells her husband Irving that she read an article by Paul Brodeur claiming that microwaves, or as she calls them, science ovens, remove the nutrition from food. Brodeur, a former science writer for The New Yorker, has published books on the apparent dangers of microwave radiation, yet sued the film's production for misappropriating Rosalind's claim to him because he never once suggested that microwaves reduce the nutrition of food. Brodeur sued for $1 million in libel damages, alleging that the false claim in the movie had tainted his reputation. Ironically, though, Brodeur more likely invoked the Streisand effect by drawing greater attention to a fleeting name drop that your average viewer wouldn't even remember otherwise. The suit was ultimately dismissed, with the court deciding that audiences wouldn't take Jennifer Lawrence's unreliable character seriously, while Brodeur himself had never held a firm written position on the nutritional aspect of microwave food. Personally, I think microwave bacon is, delicious.
Troy Dyer gets mad at Troy Dyer. Reality bites. Reality Bites has garnered a cult following over the years, with Ethan Hawke's performance as slacker Troy Dyer being noted as one of its best elements. But someone who didn't find the actor's role to be all that compelling was a guy named Troy Dyer, who sued the film's writer for defamation. Dyer was disgruntled by the fact that a character who was a bit of a scruffy scoundrel shared a name with him, and even though the writer declared that Dyer gave her permission to use his name, the two attended film school together, Dyer clearly hated the character and stated that his work as a financial consultant in Wisconsin had been affected by way of association with Hawke's portrayal. In the end, the lawsuit was settled when the studio released a statement saying that Reality Bites' depiction of Troy Dyer was completely fictitious.
An extra at Dodger Stadium was cleared of murder and sued the LAPD. Curb Your Enthusiasm. A season 4 episode of hit sitcom Curb Your Enthusiasm later served as evidence which helped save a man from death row. The 2004 episode, The Carpool Lane, contained several scenes set in Dodger Stadium during the middle of a real baseball game which was attended by 24-year-old Juan Catalan. A few months later, Catalan was arrested and charged with the murder of 16-year-old Martha Puebla. The murder occurred the very same night that Catalan was at the baseball game, so his lawyer contacted HBO in order to obtain raw filmed footage from the game in the hopes of finding him. As luck would have it, Catalan and his young daughter were easily identifiable in the tapes, effectively exonerating him and leading to his release. This led him to being able to file a lawsuit against the LAPD for false imprisonment, misconduct, and defamation, resulting in him receiving $320,000 as a settlement. This stranger-than-fiction story was also the basis for a 2017 Netflix short documentary which is called Long Shot, which is absolutely worth your time.
The killer's familiar mask, Happy Death Day. Universal was sued on the grounds that the Happy Death Day horror movies supposedly stole a distinctive design for the killer's mask, based on the mascot of the movie's fictional high school from the New Orleans Pelicans' mascot, King Cake Baby. The creator of the mascot, Jonathan Berticelli, sued Universal, citing that they used the likeness without permission, seeking not only half of the existing profits from both current films, but 50% of all future proceeds as well. The lawsuit is still ongoing, though opinion is sharply divided in the court of social media. Some see the resemblance as uncanny, while others believe the cherub-like design isn't inherently original enough to warrant legal action. Let me know what you think down in the comments, because to me, it's pretty striking, isn't it?
School Shooting, The Basketball Diaries. Starring a baby-faced Leonardo DiCaprio, 1995's The Basketball Diaries features a dream sequence in which the actor dons a black trench coat and shoots up a room full of school students. It's the kind of political firecracker that you just wouldn't see in a movie today, but back then, it didn't really cause too much of a disturbance. But that changed with the 1997 Heath High School shooting. This tragic event occurred at the aforementioned Kentucky secondary school, where a teenager started firing on a group of praying students, injuring 5 and killing 3. As tends to happen when violent incidents like this happen, people started to blame all sorts of different things, and the Basketball Diaries shooting scene quickly became a scapegoat due to its similarities with the real-life attack. And in fact, things got so severe that the producers and distributors of the film were sued $130 million by the parents of the deceased kids, with one of the lawyers involved, Jack Thompson, saying, "We intend to hurt Hollywood." The lawsuit contended that the shooter had been heavily influenced by the violence in the Basketball Diaries, but the case was eventually dismissed, with the court unable to draw a strong enough link between the on-screen violence and the real-life violence.
Claiming Andrew Colburn framed Stephen Avery, making a murderer. Few documentary series in recent years have made as much of a tectonic impact as Netflix's Making a Murderer, which is at least partly responsible for ushering in our present fetishistic obsession with true crime documentaries. In 2018, shortly after the series' conclusion, one of the officers investigating Teresa Halbach's murder, Andrew Colburn, filed a defamation lawsuit against Netflix and the show's directors. He claimed the series had slanderously implied that he had framed Stephen Avery, the currently incarcerated man convicted of Halbach's murder, and who the show argues has been falsely imprisoned. The suit claims that Netflix omitted, distorted, and falsified material and significant facts in order to portray the plaintiff as a corrupt police officer who planted evidence to frame an innocent man. Surprisingly, Colburn didn't ask for compensation, but simply clarification in the documentary itself of his role in the events.
Jerry Heller's defaming and copyright infringing depiction, straight out of Compton. It was only inevitable that a film as incendiary as NWA biopic Straight Outta Compton would receive its fair share of legal interest from the parties depicted, but none more so than the group's former manager, Jerry Heller. Heller filed a 12-claim $110 million suit against the filmmakers, not only citing a defaming misrepresentation of his character, but that material had been lifted from his autobiography without permission. Heller believed the film painted him as a, quote, sleazy manager who took advantage, though the defamation aspect of the suit was largely tossed out in mid-2016. Even though Heller died of a heart attack later that summer, which his lawyers claim were provoked by the stress of his depiction in the film, Heller's estate continued with the copyright infringement aspect of the suit. Late last year, though, a judge dismissed it on the grounds that Heller's estate failed to establish his partial authorship of the film's screenplay.
Helicopter accident. Twilight Zone, the movie. One of the most notable on-set accidents of all time was the helicopter crash that killed several actors for the Twilight Zone movie. The accident took place while shooting the Time Out section of the film, wherein Vic Morrow's character gets transported to a jungle in the middle of the Vietnam War. The scene, which was ultimately cut, called for Morrow to carry two youngsters across a shallow river while being chased by a helicopter, but sadly the aircraft spun out of control, landing on the three actors and killing them instantly. As a result, the director, the associate producer, production manager, explosive specialist, and helicopter pilot were accused of involuntary manslaughter. But in 1987, 5 years after the accident, all 5 people were acquitted of all charges. Still, families of the victims earned financial compensation as a result of the deaths, with Morrow's kids said to have won around $850,000.
Using the opening title's music without giving proper credit, Lucifer. The opening title to the recently concluded fantasy series Lucifer may last for all of just a few seconds, but it formed the basis of a lawsuit against both Warner Brothers and the series' composer, Marco Beltrami. The suit was brought by musicians Robert and Aaron Marderosian, who, as the band Heavy Young Heathens, wrote the song Being Evil Has a Price, from which the short excerpt is derived. The pair claimed that they agreed to contribute the song to help the composer, who was struggling to come up with a fitting piece for the titles, on the condition that they receive an on-screen credit for the song and retain all publishing rights for it. They further claimed that the composer passed the song off as his own, and that they received no credit, weren't liable to receive compensation, and as such Warner Brothers incorrectly believes the song to be their own property. The suit was filed back in early 2017 and nothing had been made public since, so it's probably safe to assume that the case was either dropped or quietly settled out of court.
Stu's Tattoo, The Hangover Part 2. The Hangover Part 2 has received several lawsuits over the past few years, including an injured stuntman settling out of court and Louis Vuitton unsuccessfully suing for the inclusion of a fake handbag in one scene. But none proved more bizarre than the legal kerfuffle over a tattoo. There's a hilarious scene in the final film where Stu wakes up with Mike Tyson's distinctive tattoo plastered across the side of his face, prompting the tattoo artist who originally created the ink for Tyson, S. Victor Whitmill, to sue the production. Whitmill claimed that the design was copyrighted, and that Warner Brothers never sought permission to use it, while the studio fired back that a tattoo, as residing permanently on a human's face, could not be subject to conventional copyright law. Whitmill's outlandish request to prevent the film's release was rejected, while Warner Brothers made provisions to digitally alter Stu's tattoo if the lawsuit ended unfavorably for them. In the end, Warner Brothers settled with Whitmill for an undisclosed sum. And as silly as the suit might sound on paper, Whitmill had a point considering how extensively Stu's inked-up face was featured in the movie's trailers and posters, and that the comedic context was in large part authored by Whitmill's design.
Freeway chase gone wrong. Transformers: Dark of the Moon. In a tragic accident on the set of 2011's Transformers Dark of the Moon, an extra was left with permanent brain damage when a steel cable snapped and smashed through the windshield of her car, striking her in the head. Gabriella Cadillo was driving her own vehicle, working as an extra while filming the movie's freeway chase scene. The cable was under a lot of tension due to it pulling a stunt car, and eventually that tension proved too much. Gabriella was quickly airlifted to hospital and underwent emergency surgery, but sadly she lost about a third of the top of her head, and couldn't even remember the accident. Shortly after, her family sued Paramount Pictures for negligence, demanding $350,000 for the negative impact the accident would have on Gabriella's personal life and career prospects. The case took a while to resolve, but eventually Gabriella's side came out on top. She was awarded with an $18.5 million settlement in May 2012, at which time she was undergoing therapy at an institute in Chicago.
Claiming that Nona Gaprindashvili never competed against men, the Queen's Gambit. 80-year-old Georgian world chess champion Nona Gaprindashvili sued Netflix for defamation over a single sliver of dialogue midway through the series' final episode. While Beth Harmon is in the middle of a chess match, one of the commentators compares her to the champion Gaprindashvili, though backhandedly notes that she never faced men. This is factually incorrect, as the chess player often faced up against and defeated men, even playing several high-ranking grandmasters. Gaprindashvili called the show's claim manifestly false, as well as being grossly sexist and belittling, and accused Netflix of spinning the lie in order to make Beth's own fictional achievements seem more spectacular.
A prologue gone wrong leaves an actress's face scarred. Ghostland. 2018 indie horror film Ghostland was hit with a lawsuit following an on-set accident while shooting the movie's prologue sequence. 19-year-old actress Taylor Hickson, who played a young version of the character Vera, had her face disfigured while filming a scene where her character was banging on a glass window. After being instructed to pound harder on the glass by director Pascal Laugier, it shattered and she fell through the window pane, resulting in Hickson being rushed to hospital and receiving 70 stitches, leaving her with permanent facial scarring. Hickson sued the production in March 2018, citing lost work due to her injuries and claiming that the production company, unfortunately named Incident Productions, didn't take basic steps to create a safe set by using neither safety glass nor stunt doubles. To further worsen the film's already negative wave of PR, its insensitive marketing campaign featured the protagonist with a stylized, fractured face. The lawsuit is still ongoing, though given that this seems like an incredibly clear-cut case of negligence, one can't imagine a judge ruling in the production's favor.
The Crispin Glover lookalike, Back to the Future 2. Despite being offered the opportunity to return, actor Crispin Glover chose not to reprise his role as George McFly in 1989's Back to the Future Part 2, but that didn't stop the filmmakers from putting the character in the movie anyway. The way director Robert Zemeckis did this was by using footage of Glover that had been shot for the original movie, also went one step further by enlisting actor Jeffrey Weissman to shoot some new George scenes, and it was this creative choice that led to Glover filing a lawsuit against Universal Pictures. Why? Well, rather than having Weissman simply look like Weissman, Zemeckis trussed the actor up with facial prosthetics to make him look exactly like Glover. However, Glover never gave the crew permission to do this, and while Zemeckis had every right to use the character of George McFly, he did not have the right to use Glover's likeness. While the case didn't get too deep into the court system, it was eventually settled for a reported $760,000, and inspired changes in the Screen Actors Guild rules that aimed to prevent situations like this from ever cropping up again.
Portraying prosecutor Linda Farstein as racist and unethical, When They See Us. The fantastic 2019 miniseries When They See Us depicts the case of the Central Park Five, where 5 black and Latino youths were falsely convicted of raping and attacking a white woman in Central Park in 1989, before having their verdicts overturned years later. In the series, Felicity Huffman portrays Linda Farstein, a lawyer who oversaw the prosecution in the case. In many scenes, the show depicts her as unwaveringly committed to sending the young men down for the crime, even in the face of evidence to the contrary. She's also shown referring to the defendants as animals and little thugs, and her characterization in the show implies a racially motivated component to the convictions. In March 2020, she filed a lawsuit against Netflix for defamation.